Thank you, Francesco, for this most inspiring keynote, and welcome everybody here in the room and in front of your laptops at home. Let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm Rebekka Weiß. I'm Head of Trust and Security at BITKOM, and I have the great pleasure and honor to be moderator for the next and the last panel of this third day of this year's Data Summit. So, Pencho, you have been saving the best for last, right? Now, please please join me in welcoming our three panelists that will join Francesco on the stage and our colleague from the EU Commission virtually. So, Marco Alexander-Breit from the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy here in Berlin is with us. Yeah, please join me. Thank you. Take a seat. And Buthion from Scaleway from France is also here with us today, and Witte Wijsmuller is, added virtually. Thank you for joining us as well. Okay, that works perfectly. Cool. So we'll be diving right into it, basically, because in the last 3 days, we've been discussing data, the European market, and especially Europe's competitiveness, and all of the problems that we have right now. And I'm most keen to hear from all of our experts here on this great panel on what we can do to further competitiveness in the cloud market, because I think that is one of the most important issues that needs to be solved. And I think what we just heard from Francesco gave a really good overview of what GAIAX can and should do to improve competitiveness, but I think there are a few more building blocks to the whole issue, and I'm very keen to hear about them as well. And we'll start with a short round of introductory remarks from all of our panelists, so you get a glimpse of their perspectives. And spoiler alert, I think we'll have some things that we'll be discussing quite heatedly, maybe even, because the perspectives differ quite a lot in some aspects. And I think that's a great chance for us here today, because we will be trying to find maybe one solution that we'll all agree on in the end. So that's our goal for today. We have 1 hour to do that, so keep that in mind. We'll start with the introduction by Witte. So Witte, if you think about the competitiveness and its issues for the European market in the cloud sector, what, from your view, from the European Commission's view, have been the most important aspects, the most important works that you've been doing in the last couple of months to further competitiveness for European companies?
Guten Tag aus Brüssel. Hi, good afternoon. Good to be with you today, unfortunately remotely. I am Witte Wijsmuller, working for the cloud unit of the European Commission's DG Connect. And indeed, our work is to implement the European data strategy. Data processing infrastructures, so cloud infrastructures, form a key part of the data strategy. Why? Because, of course, cloud is increasingly deployed to process the data of the whole data economy. So even when data is shared, cloud is increasingly becoming the only tool that makes it possible to do so effectively and without having to transfer large quantities of data from one side to the other. So cloud is increasingly underpinning the data economy, and I think even further, all economic activity increasingly in Europe. So when you're going to your office in the morning with the metro, chances are that that metro system is running on a cloud system somewhere. So that makes it perhaps easy to understand that this is a key issue for us to address in the context of the data economy and the data strategy. Also, because we see that the dependency of European businesses is increasing. Eurostat estimated that 95% of European businesses are highly dependent on cloud, and 38% are dependent to a higher or upper degree in any case. And at the same time, we also have to conclude that 85% of the cloud services offered in the European market are offered by a provider headquartered not in the European Union, but in a third country. So that leads us to let's say, asking a couple of questions that we all want to address in the European data strategy, and we can only do that in a, let's say, multifaceted approach or way. So we ask ourselves, how can risks of dependency on cloud providers be mitigated? And how can we stimulate European leadership in the next wave of cloud and edge technologies? To answer those questions, we have introduced in the data strategy a number of tools. We will build on an approach of competition and market dominance with the proposal of the Digital Markets Act, which we have already proposed and are currently negotiating with the co-legislators. We will additionally provide ex-ante rules to mitigate the risks I just mentioned, particularly risks to fairness and trustworthiness of cloud services on the European market. We'll do so, for example, by the Data Act, which we are currently working on. We'll also present an initiative that will offer a more coherent legislative or regulatory framework around cloud and edge services, which will be the EU Cloud Rulebook. That should really lead to the codification of all requirements of EU law, binding, so non-binding standards and self-regulatory schemes applicable to cloud on the European market. And finally, and I think this is a very important one, we cannot only do so by legislation. Referees don't win matches. So we need to coordinate as well investments by European parties, which are coordinated and investing in the next generation of technology on cloud and edge to make sure that we build a European leadership. And to facilitate this, we have launched the European Alliance on Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud. And I guess we'll address some of that later on today, so I'll keep it at this for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think one of the most important key takeaways from what you just said is the aspect of a multifaceted approach that will be necessary to drive competition forward and give new and established European players a chance to be more competitive in the cloud market. But of course, you are coming from kind of a regulatory point of view, and although, Marco, of course, you're also kind of one of the regulators, I always think of you as one of the founding fathers, maybe, of Gaia-X, because you really started the whole project. So thank you for that, by the way. And seeing that you did that, it would be, I think, most interesting for our audience to hear how you would describe the way that you took and what you are doing now, because we heard from Francesco, it kind of took off now, but what's your role now?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me today, and I am very happy that you, Francesco, are here, because that Francesco exists, and that he's here is kind of proof that we have been succeeding. 3 years ago, you would have invited me to tell you what the idea behind Gaia-X was, and I would have told you what the idea was, and I would have said the next step is that we get companies behind the idea. A year later, Otero was with me at the European Data Summit, and he was representative of the 22 companies, and I was representative of the states commenting on what the 22 are doing. And right now I'm here sitting commenting on what Francesco is doing, who is responsible for the whole AISBL, for the whole organization that took off since then. Our role changed, of course it did. We left the driver's seat, got on the back bench, and purposefully so, because in the beginning it was always the narrative that we're going to kickstart this politically, but this is something that needs to be done by companies for companies. Because we are aware of the opinion of two things. First of all, this is not politics in the end, it's about businesses, it's about a level playing field for businesses, and it's about products. The second thing is, we were perfectly sure that these things should not be decided by government officials like me, but from people with a business background, and that actually have been working on products and do know what the customers want. And This leads me to the multifaceted approach, what Europe can do right now. And first of all, legislation, yes, of course, leveling the playing field. The second thing is we need to level the playing field not only by legislation, but by actually making companies obey the rules. And GAIAX is a very, very important tool here because it's an environment where companies agree to keep the rules, and where they establish an environment of trust. And trust is the most important thing for the third pillar, and the third pillar is data spaces. We need products and we need collaboration by actual companies, not only by ideas. And if you have an environment of trust, which GAIAX settles up, which a lot of money can settle up because it kind of lowers the threshold of cooperation, and which legislation can lower the threshold even more, then you have this kind of this ecosystem where innovative ideas can come to fruition. So I think it's a threefold approach: legislation, companies, products, and data spaces that actually get things done and provide that environment and ecosystem. The German government right now, what are we doing in the backbench? We are spending money. We are spending money on three things. The first of all is the German hub, which is very successful, more than 600 companies cooperating in these, in the German hub of GAIAX, working on data spaces requirements, working together in close contact with the GAIAX AISBL. We are very happy about that fruitful cooperation. The second thing, we are spending money together with others to make GAIAX work. The federation services Francesco has been introducing or showing you are partly funded by the German government, kind of to kickstart that again. And everything I'm saying is about kickstarting. It's not that we want to fund this for the next 20 years, and Francesco knows that already. It's about that we make things start, and we lower the threshold of cooperation and then make companies do it themselves. The third thing is we are actually funding use cases. We are funding 180 million use cases, 180 million euros on use cases, 22 of them, 13 of them, in our German national GAIAX funding scheme. But it's not only German companies that are cooperating within these frames, it's French companies too, it's Dutch companies too that have been part of the funding process. But we are funding, I think, one of the most important actual use cases of GAIAX, which is Catena-X. And this will be kind of the lighthouse project because not only the importance of the car manufacturers in the German ecosystem, in the German economy, but it's a vertical. It's the car manufacturers with the companies that provide the products to them. It sets up data spaces and it provides a huge opportunity to make the value chain, especially in that regard, a data value chain and the European value chain together with international partners. And that, in the end, is what we're doing. Aiding the AISBL with council in the governmental advisory board, making things kickstart with money, and then we hope that the companies and their cooperation will bring the rest of GAIAX to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for putting emphasis on the importance of data spaces and that they are built by the companies and active use cases. So I really like the statement that data spaces have to be driven by businesses and not just by ideas. So it has to be transformed into practice, and it has to be something that is really needed and useful in the market, because otherwise it won't really be a productive outcome.
If I may add one thing to that, and this is because why is that thing called GAIA-X? It's because we have been thinking about this environment from the very first second. The ecosystem of companies is the most important part. It's not the legislation. It's not the rules themselves. It's the companies that want to adhere to the rules and work together in an ecosystem. Gaia, Mother Nature. Yeah,
that's true. And this collaboration basically is also something that I always feel is kind of what Gaia-X really is made of, because I'm also part of Gaia. I'm leading one of the working groups, and it's really great to see how everybody is giving so much effort, so much time. You said it's 1,000 of you can call us volunteers. And we're all trying to further the same mission. So that's really something, I think something new. It might be the biggest industry project across Europe, I don't know, ever, basically. So let's see how it turns out. And now I'm very keen on hearing what Lucas has to add, because Lucas, your perspective is kind of special, and I think it's a very important one, because for one, you are representing one of the most important French cloud providers. Scaleway is extremely keen on sovereignty and on building federated services, but also you have a special, we might call it opinion, and also a special stand on Gaia-X, and I think it's an extremely important addition to our panel today, so I'm very keen to hear your view on how we can achieve competitiveness if it's not with Gaia-X.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebekka, for the introduction, and thank you also to Pencho and to the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for inviting us today. It's great to be in Berlin for real and not behind a screen. So yes, actually, on my side, what I will try to do is to provide you with, a French-based European cloud service providers perspective about what it takes for us to be competitive, or what is our philosophy behind it. And the first element, maybe to mention, just to make sure we talk about the same order of magnitude, and Francesco, indeed, in your keynote, you mentioned the amazing potentials that cloud services offer for Europe, and that we are still at the nascent phase, in a way, because we are only entering this cloud and digital decade at the same time. You mentioned this figure of 1/3 of companies maybe today being in the cloud, which is actually interesting because in a way Europe is still behind the US and Asia in terms of cloud adoption, and typically, for instance, for an actor like Scaleway, but also for the European tech ecosystem, it's a massive source of opportunities potentially in the years to come. So that's first element. We are entering an era of great opportunities. Second thing, and it's also in line with what Witte said in terms of, and you also mentioned the Commission's objectives, by the end of the decade, 75% of companies being in the cloud. So it means, and we already see it, that the markets in Europe will be evolving extremely rapidly, almost insanely, I have to say. And that's already what we experience today on the markets. So that was maybe, and typically, yes, in 2020, I think the figures were that in Europe, the cloud markets were about 50 billion euros to go up to maybe 360 billion euros by 2030. So even more than the telecoms markets, to give you an idea. So really evolving very rapidly. So then when we talk, to give the market challenges, first of all, that we see on our side. Second aspect, which is important also to us, to understand where the competitiveness effort is to be carried, or where it needs to be stressed, is where do we extract the value from when we talk about cloud services, and we talk about it very often, in singular form. While it was also mentioned, it's really a continuum, a whole technological stack. Our analysis, and that's where we position ourselves, is that the main value added comes from software. Without software, today you have no elastic cloud, you have no modern cloud, you have no scalability, agility. So that's really where in Europe we need to put our effort on. And typically at Scaleway, we have this capacity to code our software, to plug it on the cloud infrastructures that we are proposing to our clients, and that's where the big margins arise. So that's the first thing. So this being said, so we have on the most dynamic segments of the market today, we are encountering like 30 to 40% annual growth. Can you imagine? I mean, you don't have a lot of sectors where you are encountering so important growth rates. So this has a direct implication for us, and we are today a 400 people company, so growing fast, but with our means, we need to focus. We need to focus on delivery, we need to focus on velocity, and we need to focus on innovation in product development to make sure that we can keep up the pace with the pace of those extremely rapid market growth. So this velocity for us is a key aspect. Second aspect, and it's all about long-term competitiveness for European actors like us. It's actually, and maybe you will be surprised, I don't know, but we are very humble about where we stand. We know what the current market positions are. Of course, the monopoly of the oligopoly, of a few non-European actors on the market. We of course don't aim at drastically or radically rebalancing those market conditions. But our humble approach lies actually in what we call the multi-cloud, meaning giving the ability to our clients, to the developers, to the cloud architects, to be able to have freedom of choice, of rebalancing their loads, of switching easily from one cloud provider to the other, depending on their own clients' requirements and so on and so forth. And that was actually why we were fully aligned with the original ambitions of Gaia-X, which were typically in this vein. So this multi-cloud approach is key to be pursued, and by the way, it's quite interesting to see that in Germany, in the recent coalition agreement, the multi-cloud is explicitly mentioned as a key pillar of the German cloud strategy. And two last points, and sorry, I'll try not to be too long, but that's important because if we want to be competitive, we need to identify and to capitalize on some of our strengths. Typically, maybe it will sound out of topic for some of you, but we are actually, we have strengths. And typically, if I take the environment side, for instance, we are able in Europe to deliver cloud services very cleanly, I mean, in very much respecting the highest standards of environmental practices and so on. So that's also something we can be proud of, kind of things that we can put forward or valorize. So yeah, and last point, if we want also to be competitive, because market conditions again today are what they are, and that's our very stance. Maybe that's what you refer to when saying that we have a special position, but we need to challenge the status quo, because otherwise, given the current market domination effects, we won't go anywhere. And that's where actually we need to work together along with public authorities, national and overall at EU level, to create or recreate a fairer competitive environment, better conditions, and live from the current, let's say, digital Far West we are currently competing in.
Thank you. I think challenging the status quo is what we all are trying to do, and I think we are trying to do it in different ways, because I guess you could say that there is competition in the cloud markets, but it's not by the right players, right? Because it's not us, and we're trying to solve the problem or the issue or the, I don't know, the gap that is there in the market. On the one hand, with Gaia, basically, and on the other hand, your approach is you're trying to do it faster, to put special emphasis on the European-driven technological progress, right? That's kind of the...
yeah, so maybe just to get back to the expression you used about the competition by the right players, it's not actually a question of right players, because, I mean, those non-European players typically, those who are today dominating the market, I mean, they propose great products. I mean, that's not the question, of course. It's not about the right players, it's about the right conditions and rules. Because if we don't play by the same rules, if there is no level playing field possibilities, if there is no reciprocity in the way we are being treated, for instance, we in Europe and on other continents, then you cannot actually, I mean, you deprive yourself from any development possibilities. So it's not about, you know, giving us special conditions, it's just about giving us the possibility to compete on an equal footing with the others, or to recreate those conditions. Nothing more, nothing less, actually. So it's a very liberal, or even if I would dare the word, a very ordo-liberal approach. We are in Germany here, okay, so that's nothing more, nothing less. And indeed, of course, we as a French and European player, we are entirely under European jurisdiction. We play by, we are entirely under, respecting data protection standards that in Europe are the most demanding ones. And we've also seen with the COVID-19 crisis and the ever increasing acceleration of our digitalization that there is also a resilience issue behind our economy's digitalization. And if we have too many dependencies, if we have dependencies with respect, too many dependencies with respect to actors that are not necessarily aligned with our core values, that can create issues. And typically this morning, yes, MEP Axel Voss was talking about, yes, this notion of decreasing our level of dependencies. And again, it's about time now, because if we lose 2, 3, 4 years not giving trust to the local ecosystem, it will be too late, because the level of dependency will have even increased by then. So we have the ecosystem. We can already in Europe, and maybe, yeah, that's good news. We can probably supply 80% of the market needs when it comes to the cloud, because what's important to note is that cloud services now, it's kind of strategic, but commodity. It's compute, storage, and network capacities. We can collectively offer this commodity to the clients in Europe. So now it's about how we trust, how we highlight the existing offers in the real economy to improve our competitiveness and go into a virtuous circle.
Thank you. I will come back to the equal footing you just mentioned, because Witte, I will be asking you about the Data Act and the Digital Markets Act, and how you see the impacts those two very important dossiers might have. But before we do that, I would like to circle back a bit to what Gaia-X can do to solve the issues that Lucas just described, because what we're seeing in the market is that the market share of non-European providers is still growing, right? And Gaia-X was set out to solve this. So Francesco, maybe you have some elaborations on that.
Yeah, thank you. This is the perfect segue from what I heard from Lucas. So I think this trip to Berlin is worthwhile, because I believe Scaleway will come back to the GAIAX Association, because we are fully in line with all he said. And this is exactly what we are trying to address as the challenges to make Europe competitive again. But regarding your question, I think that I try to look at things from a different perspective, because I think one of the biggest mistakes every one of us, but Europe in particular, does is becoming self-referential at times. So we keep looking at things from our own perspective, and we keep trying to possibly make the same mistakes. So when you look at the statistics, so the market, the cloud market share of non-European players have grown in the last 2 years, where possibly we have never had such a hot debate about the need of cloud sovereignty, the commitment of the European Commission, all the programs running, all the stuff that I described also earlier. You know, we may ask us a question, why is this happening? And my simple answer is that no one can rule the market. Be aware of that. So there is no regulation or legislation that can stop the market. It's a kind of natural ecosystem. So if the cloud adoption, and unfortunately the market share of non-European player is growing, per se, this is a positive fact, because it means the awareness of the companies, let me say, of the technology users, of the need to adopt the cloud, to implement that new generation of products and services I was talking about, is such that we have the maturity. So this is the right time. People start to understand that they want to move fast. The fact that they are not using our technology, or let me say alternative technologies, is because there is no alternative technologies. And the only way to make a market disruption is through disruptive solutions. That's the only way. If you want to compete in the global market, you cannot play in one country, in one region. You have to play, in the championship. It's no more, I don't know, Milan or Inter, but it's possibly even the worldwide championship, and therefore you have Italy, France, etc., playing together. Now, to make disruptive solution is our objective. Why? So how we do it? Basically, we want to move from a model that is concentrated and non-interoperable, because it is proprietary, to a model that is interoperable and federated. and uses the existing technologies. This is important. So this is the fastest way. If you want to move fast and create a disruption fast, you have to reuse at best what you have, enhance it, and become competitive with your, let me say, competitors, or I don't want to call them enemies, but to the best players in the field. We cannot win the battle trying to do the same they have done. There is no way. But what we're doing is unprecedented, because the fact that we are moving into a distributed model of cloud is not driven by GAIAX. It's driven by Gaia. It's the Mother Nature digital world decided that the data are spread everywhere. That's a fact. Another fact is that the current model of cloud, which is hyperscaled, cannot stand with that. The largest investments of hyperscalers nowadays are in the virtualization of the network. Why? Because they want to increase the door through which they can intake data. But like I said, I make the parallel of the ocean and the swimming pool as an example. You cannot bring the ocean in your swimming pool as big as it can be. So they will need to make a choice. The third fact, and this I think it's important, is that people are not trusting the current cloud platforms. That's why we have such a low percentage of adoption of the cloud. Not because the technologies out there are not good. They are fantastic, but they are not suitable for the needs of the companies and the people. So companies do not run the risk to infringe the GDPR. They don't run the risk to run into the Cloud Act jurisdictional problem. And they don't want to run the risk to move their data where they have no control of it. That's a fact. Otherwise, we would have a higher uptake of cloud. So starting from those facts, we are building something that is more transparent, so allows for controllability and sovereignty, so control. It's interoperable and allows the federation, this last point, together with interoperability, will win the battle, because the future is interoperability. And this is something that should come also from the Data Act, the Data Governance Act, and all the acts should think about interoperability. I'm not suggesting a strong regulation, because again, it would be a mistake, because if you have a strong regulation, only the winner can find workarounds. Let's think about this suggestion to create local instances of global or central architecture. This is just a localization of the lock-in model. So interoperability will never be provided by those that decided to build their business model on the lock-in. It's a by design thing. So what we are doing, we are forcing the market into a new awareness. It's a movement of data ethics, if you want, such that the market will ask for it, will create the demand and the market traction. The companies, the members of GAIAX, we hope, and many others, will decide to buy into it and build GAIAX services, GAIAX infrastructures. At that point, if you can choose, so you have a market alternatives, it is a disruptor, because nobody else provides this type of level of interoperability and transparency. And you have the critical mass, because this is the real problem of Europe. The fragmentation of the small, medium business never allowed any single player, even Scaleway, Aruba in Italy, OVH in France, no one singularly can compete with any large player. So the federation is a mechanism to create the critical mass. The transparency controllability is a mechanism to build the different type of quality of services that everybody wants and the trust that everybody expects. And reusing existing infrastructures instead of building brand new is another key tactical element of it. So it is possible, it is easy to do, and I will tell you another thing which is important, and I'll pause here. Let's not forget that cloud is not just licensing. Cloud is made of at least 3 components: licensing, which is consumed, when we talk about the pay-per-use or as a service model, projects, and services. So the run, the outsourcing. We keep talking about just one facet of the problem. We cannot just compare apples with pears. In Europe, our players, like Scaleway and others, they provide all of these elements. This is interesting. We are competitive because we have people, competencies, technical resources, licensing, of course, and through federation we can have more, and through the trusted model we can have higher value, but we have people, local, that know the product, that can adapt it, etc. In a model where we just provide licensing, like the current dominant model of the hyperscalers. They do not care about the services. There is no cloud transition if you don't want to make projects. You have to replatform, move, re-engineer, but you have to do projects. Let's not forget about it. Otherwise, we're just fighting for the best quality of the concrete of the street. But it's not the end of it. We need to do some much more. And Europe has a unique competitiveness in skills, in resources, in technologies. We don't have a gap in terms of innovation. We have the best startups in the world. Let me give you another example. In Europe, we have an ecosystem of small companies and startups, which is 5,000 across the Europe member states. 700 of them sorry, are tier 1. They are worldwide leaders in their niche solution. It's a small thing, but they are worldwide leaders. The second country, guess whom? United States, with less than 300. So our problem is just finding a place where these excellences can sit and gain the critical mass and the visibility they deserve, and there will be a real alternative. I'm absolutely sure about that.
Thank you. Marco, I think you have some thoughts to add to that.
Yes, because I completely agree, and that's the first thing. And the second thing is, especially giving European possibilities visibility, and that's the second step actually. And the first step, make them be able to play on the level playing field in the first place. That was exactly the goal that we had when we had the idea in the very beginning of GAIAX. And I think Francesco has very well shown you that we are actually leapfrogging. What our goal was never to build kind of the European AWS or the European Microsoft. That was never the goal. The goal was to deal with the situation at hand in a manner that it enables European companies to compete in the next stage, which means make them have access to data plus access to customers, and then let them do what they can do best, being innovative and offer services and solutions for the next decade. And this is exactly what GAIAX is doing, not competing by copycatting what has been good in the beginning of the 2010s, but what is needed in 2020, 2030, 2040, beyond.
Okay, so it is about access to data, access to customers, but it's also about trust, transparency, interoperability with a very user-centric view, basically, right? Because we're always trying to build something that will work in the market because it works for the user.
Let's make it simple. You can travel across Europe because you have one identity card or a passport, which has got the same credentials. You go to any border, anybody can recognize you. You have a policeman that you cannot judge, and your data is transparent. Why don't we apply that to digital services? That's what GAIAX is about.
Yeah, thank you. Lucas, I think you have something
maybe
to
just
add as well.
one reaction or one compliment, sure. Because when we heard that, yes, indeed, we don't use in Europe yet the local technologies, etc., and about the role of the markets, we also need to understand how it happened. For instance, and in the US, how did these hyperscalers emerge and grew very rapidly? Because 15 years ago they were not even existing. I mean, Scaleway is older than AWS, is older than Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform. If you take this perspective, I mean, you need also to consider the role of US public authorities to, provide huge amount and captive public markets, public procurements to those companies. Of course, it's always a very comfortable basis to have $100 million or $1 billion contract to consolidate your competitiveness locally and then going abroad. Not even talking about the over commercial practices that enable them to leverage on their strengths. But that's where, I mean, in Europe we still lack, and this implies the need to go beyond GAIA-X per se, we need to have a kind of industrial policy approach on the cloud aspects, because again, and with the current crisis, it's really now the linchpin of the digitalization of our economies and societies. So it's of strategic, if we can say, dimension. And this industrial policy approach, which is applied in other sectors without any shame, needs to find a place for the cloud sector. So yes, public procurement. How can we put provisions enabling to incentivize local tech players? Because we have a Small Business Act in Europe, but applied to technological players, it's not the case yet. And the proportion of European technologies bought by public authorities or large groups is very, very weak. If you go to the US, it's not exactly the same thing. You also have all the provisions in the US about Buy American Act, these kind of things. So again, it's not about being protectionists, it's just about leveling the playing field. If we don't have the same industrial policy approach as other continents have, we will never succeed, because they can create a critical mass that we cannot compete with.
Before we go back to you, Marco, I will ask Witte a few questions, if you allow, because I don't want to lose him over there in Brussels. But thank you, Lucas. I think you made a very important point, and I would hope that all regulators really get the importance of a new investment and a new funding strategy for Europe as well, when it comes to procurement, but overall, basically, not just in the cloud
procurement
sector.
Is real economy. So that's why beyond fundings, if you have the public authorities providing its concrete trust, because it's about trust, through buying cloud services from local players, you will see the spillover and the positive side effects immediately on the private sector and on the overall ecosystem. So it's not even about fundings immediately, it's about public procurement, real economy again.
Absolutely. So, Witte, I'm very sorry. We've been kind of we got a little distracted in what we need to do here in the room. But as I mentioned earlier, I think, and we all agree upon that at the beginning of our panel, that regulation is one of the major building blocks for the ecosystem and for driving European competitiveness as well. And they are basically. Yeah, no, there are more than two very important dossiers on the table right now. But I think the upcoming Data Act and the Digital Markets Act are two of the most important when it comes to the competitiveness of services and also for the cloud market. And I'll try to bundle the two questions we have been preparing for that together with you now in view of the time. Time is running out again. But maybe you can give us a brief overview of what you think the Data Act and the Digital Markets Act can change when it comes to to the potential for European cloud players, basically, because they are about data exchange, they're about switchability, they are about contesting market power of existing players. But what do you think are the most important aspects that will change with those two regulations?
Yes, thank you, Rebekka, for those questions. I am going to take the opportunity, however, to also chip into the debate we just had with the other speakers as well, because I think there's really a couple of important remarks to make. We fully agree that the next European revolution on cloud will be a revolution of cloud federation. And I hear all three other speakers say exactly the same. So that is clear. And I would like to add to that picture, it won't be a revolution of cloud federation only on the side of supply. It will also be a revolution of federation on the side of the demand, chipping into what Lucas, I think, very rightfully says on public procurement. We have 27 member states in the European Union, all doing their own public procurement on cloud. How can we, let's say, get together and rationalize the approach in that regard, set the same criteria that cloud services for the public sector, for example, would need to comply with, and then we can leverage our European buying power as well in the cloud market. So that is why we'll put forward, in addition to the EU cloud rulebook, also common requirements for public procurement of cloud. Another point, and then I get to let's say the subject area of the Data Act, is we need to realize that we are at a almost historic moment of opportunity for Europe when it's about cloud. Why? Because, well, first of all, in 2020, 2019, we saw the establishment of Gaia-X, first as a Franco-German initiative, now a private initiative. We saw in 2020, early 2020, that we in the European Commission published the European Data Strategy, that multifaceted approach. And then, unfortunately, of course, the pandemic struck us. But that offered also opportunity in a way. I mean, they say never waste a good crisis, in that we have this European Corona Recovery Fund of 750 billion, of which 20% is earmarked for digital. And on top of that, we have what was also promised for digital in the conventional European funding programs. And on top of that still, and I think that is a very important point to make, is we have the political willingness in the member states to work together on digital issues. This is typically not an issue where member states disagree with each other, like perhaps is the case in other policy fields. So what we need to do now is we need to take all the actors around the table that are also represented here in this panel, so the member states, the cloud providers, the standard setters, so my three fellow panelists, and to come together and to really take this opportunity. And we can do that by setting the right framework conditions. What are those framework conditions? Yes, it's interoperability standardization. Yes, it's what Gaia-X is setting and putting forward in that regard. But we need to also have a bit of focus on the rules of the game in that regard. Who is at the table of standard setting? And what are the rules that apply in the standard setting process? How can we make sure that larger actors and other actors on the market, because this is a transversal problem, really offer portability, interoperability to allow this seamless multi-vendor cloud continuum that we need in Europe. And that can only be done by legislation that is coming from the public sector through an appropriate democratic process, like we are currently working on the Data Act, which will focus on, and that's public information, on the switchability, so on the switching between different cloud providers, not only at the infrastructure level, but also at the PaaS and the SaaS level of cloud, where we see that problems still persist on the market. So that is important. Let me say one thing. Let's say a word of comfort in the direction of also Francesco, who said, "Don't come up with too strong a regulation." And I understand his plea, because what we don't want to do is stifle innovation. Definitely not in an area where we see, a myriad of different functionalities exist in cloud, myriad of different service types. So we don't want to regulate on the technical elements of interoperability, because that could hamper innovation. And we have seen that in the European Commission. So we will build on the capacities that industry has in that regard. Now, for the rest, on the Data Act, this is, as I said, an ongoing initiative. We are still drafting the act, so I cannot comment too much on that. I would like to add that we are also looking into the trustworthiness issue. We're exploring what we can do there. So this was also something that mentioned, I believe, by Francesco. So the problem that data may be accessed because of laws that are in place in foreign jurisdictions and have extraterritorial effect. So how can we shield European customers of clouds, that they can have the trust in their cloud service, and that they can have trust in the fairness of the cloud services offered on the European market?
Thank you so much. And Pencho, how much time do we have left? I think we were already...
We have a couple of minutes. We have one question. If is still, would you like to have? Sure. Maybe Eileen could have a microphone. I can support. Just a second.
Thank you very much. Should I stand or? Well, Eileen Chivot, I work at the EPP in Brussels, and thank you so much for this excellent conference and this panel. I have 3 questions, actually, sorry. I wanted to be a bit provocative. It seems, what happened with GAIAX and Scaleway, there's typically a culture of compromise that's maybe more German than French. I'm French myself, but I have to say this is something I have observed. So my first question is for Luca. Do you think that going it alone will be a winning strategy? Sometimes they say if you can't beat them, join them. And now if you don't want to join them, can you beat them? That's my question. Then to Francesco, I think you had a hearing at the Parliament this week in the Industry Committee, and they made comments afterwards. And I was wondering if you could tell me more about why do you think they said that they didn't quite understand the objectives of Gaia-X and that they thought things were a little vague there. And then maybe for Witte, and again to you, Francesco, to what extent the Commission's Cloud Alliance and Gaia-X are acting in competition with each other or in complementarity with each other. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for the excellent questions. I think we'll start with Lucas.
Thank you, Eileen, for the question. So, actually, we don't feel like going alone. First of all, we are, partnering with a lot of actors in our ecosystems. We are also involved in alternative coalitions with local players, tech players. So we don't feel alone. First of all. Second of all, again, we've been a founding member of GAIAX because we were fully in line with the ambitions that led to the initiation of the project. So again, portability, transparency, interoperability. We are fully committed to deliver products in line with those issues. And the fact that we focus on our business immediate priorities on our side doesn't mean that typically we will not comply with GAIA-X labels when they will get settled. So we really don't feel alone, but we need to focus on the growth on the real economy. Otherwise, in 10 years from now, or even in 5 years from now, you may not see me anymore at this front table.
Yeah. Yes. So the hearing at the Parliament was extremely useful because, first of all, was the first hearing by the MEPs. It was fully packed, so there was more than 100 people. And I don't think, to be honest, the right summary is that there was confusion. I had some very precise questions. As usual, I have questions around some of the news that circulate on the press. One of that is Scaleway taking their decision, and freedom of choice is part of GAIA-X, so we are absolutely agreeing with that. Other questions were around the fact we onboard non-European members in our association, and other questions were about the strategy. So how can we make it, like the questions of today? And I think it was extremely useful. I received kind of 20 questions, and given the time of those type of hearings was quite difficult, but I think I managed to give a lot of information. When it gets to the alignment between the European Commission, I wanted to comment on what Witte said before. And I'm really glad that the approach is not to overrule, because we have understood that overruling, like the GDPR, basically introduced a roadblock in innovation. Because when we introduced the GDPR, as a matter of fact, it was when we realized that data was important. And at that point in time, we introduced something that tells us what we cannot do with data. But now we desperately needed something that tells us what we can do with data and how to exploit them. And the right way to do it is to give clear guidance, like we need interoperability. This is a strong statement that I'm expecting coming.
And you need to avoid commercial practices hampering interoperability beyond technical requirements. That's also the added value of Data Act for us.
But if you give this guidance, I'm sure that the market is capable to ride the opportunity. In other words, there is many players, in particular in Europe, that are capable to provide interoperability because they do not have a conflict of interest with that. They do not have to protect, let me say, proprietary technologies. And therefore, once the rule is there, the interpretation of the rule can be taken by the market. The market has to lead, and to create a disruption, this is what has to happen. So the European Alliance, I think you referred to the European Alliance for Industrial Data Edge and Cloud, is that one, yeah? First of all, that's an initiative of the European Commission. We, as GAIAX, are not, strictly speaking, part of it, but there is no conflict at all. And actually, even from the beginning, which was back in October last year, there was discussions around it, and there was a clear alignment, for example, in one of the objectives of this alliance, which is creating a cloud rulebook, and the work we are doing at GAIAX. So even with a loosely coupling, because we are not a European Commission agency or stuff like that, there is a strong coupling and there is a strong commitment by the European Commission to leverage and reuse what we are doing. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense to restart from scratch. So I think I can say that we are fully aligned, even though we are separate organizations.
Maybe, yeah, Marco, if
Yes.
you...
Thank you. There is a strong commitment from the member states too, as you can imagine. I would like to chime in on one thing, and this is, I don't think that it's a conflict of nations. I think it's more a point of view. Either you are thinking globally or you're thinking European. And the thing is, what GAIAX tries to do in the first, tried to do from the first second on was having a European perspective on global things. And if you have a European perspective on the cloud market and you stop at that point, then you think, oh yeah, Europe has a lot of customers and I want them to use and to buy my product, so it would actually help me to have a level playing field in Europe, which means to copy bad regulation and legislation from other countries, so there is maybe a Buy European Act. But this is bad regulation, and it's not working globally, because it doesn't make your companies competitive, it makes them actually worse. What you need is to see, look, in Europe there's a lot of potential, there's things hindering us, like lock-in effects, there's things hindering us like there is an ocean and we are trying to compete with a pool, and there is things hindering us like public procurement, that is actually buying the things that work instead of the things that might be working in 3 years. I'll get back to that. And what GAIAX thought was, if we want to compete, the things and the solutions and the applications and the services that come out of GAIAX, they need to be competitive and not just European, because in the end, it's a buyer's market here. The second thing is, if we want to be competitive, it needs to work global, because companies like Siemens, for example, or Bosch, or Airbus, they are global companies. They cannot just afford buying solutions that build a wall around Europe. And the third thing is public procurement. The goal that GAIAX tries to achieve, and we are helping with that, is, or should try to achieve, is not to replace each and every product in the world with a GAIAX product. It should be being in the position to actually compete around about public procurement. And this is something we are doing in Germany, where we have established a path that GAIAX is able to show what it's worth and how it's working, and that it is working, and just be open-minded for European solutions. But as of now, don't get me wrong, I don't see a solution that is able to scale like 2.5 million of civil war servants in Germany on the same platform with the same reliability that American solutions do have right now. So it needs time. We are giving it the time.
Thank you. And maybe, yeah? We'll come back to the public procurement part again, I think, but Witte, I would like to hear from you how you see the relationship between the Cloud Alliance and Gaia one more time.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I would really like to support what Marco was just saying. When I said, the European revolution of cloud will be a revolution of cloud federation, it means that you build on the intrinsic strengths that the European industry has, that we have to leapfrog technologically, and that then we can build solutions that actually add value to the market internationally. indeed federation should work, and it's a long-term project. And this is also the goal of the European Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud, because if you want to make an actual effort on the market, which is, let's say, dispersed over 27 member states, it means you need a whole deal of coordination to make sure that businesses, public authorities that invest, for example, with the funds coming from the Corona Recovery Fund, that we invest in the right technologies, but also that we invest in a concerted and coordinated way, so that we develop together the compass of where we want to go in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Because indeed, we can only compete with competitive services that actually add value. And we think that will be those opportunities at the edge of the network and in terms of highly tailored software services. Now, getting to your question on how does GAIA-X relate to the European Alliance, there is no formal relationship. The European Commission has no formal relationship whatsoever with GAIA-X, but we are monitoring GAIA-X with interest, and specifically, what will come out potentially of work that GAIA-X is currently doing, and then we can see whether, for example, standards developed by GAIA-X could find a way into the EU Cloud Rulebook, but that will be on the basis of an objective procedure that won't be any different for GAIA-X standards than for any other standards on the market. But one final remark I think is important. We do not aim to reinvent the wheel in terms of interoperability standards. So the full, let's say, synergies and complementarity is really in the interest of everyone between the work that GAIA-X is doing and other European initiatives. Thanks.
Thank you so much. As with nearly all panels with such extraordinary panelists and on such an important topics, we've run out of time before I got to ask all my questions. So I guess we'll just stay here for another 2 hours, if that's okay with you. No, we won't be doing that, but we'll continue the dialogue, because if you all allow me to trying to conclude what you've all said in the past hour, I think we all agree that to strengthen competitiveness in the cloud market, we need a multifaceted approach. It won't be one solution for everything. That won't work. We need challenges of the opinions and of the projects that are in the market. And there are some mechanisms that will hopefully transform the push that we are doing now with Gaia and with players such as Scaleway, with the regulation from the Commission, to a pull from the market, to a real pull from the market. So everything we are developing here in Europe will come into full force and make us more competitive in the next 5 years. I think we all learned a lot. I have to convey my thanks to all 3 of you, to Witte in Brussels. I hope we can continue the dialogue another time and in more depth. Maybe we'll take 5 hours then, but for now, thank you, have a great evening, and I give it back to Pencho.
But first, so the time has come. 3 days of digital competitiveness, 3 days of great keynotes and discussions during the European Data Summit. We at the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation are so grateful for all the ideas and keynotes and discussions during all these 3 days. And especially we are so grateful for trying to bring your ideas and to really improve the current proposals of the European Commission, which are on the table. And actually we are doing exactly that. We're trying to support the work of the European Commission through this summit. My special thanks to Nikolaos and Ioana from the representation of the European Commission in Berlin. My special thanks to our media team. Don't want to forget someone, but just want to mention Magdalena, Jule, Jeanette, Jana, and my colleagues Christoph, Tobias, Lucas for all the support in various form. Hope to meet you all again soon in the near future. Many thanks. Goodbye.